The high-pitched, agonizing screech of cheap plastic folding chairs dragging across polished linoleum hummed softly beneath the clinking of heavy silver, crystal glassware, and loud, artificial laughter across the room. I stood at the threshold of the grand ballroom at the Fairview Country Club, wearing a custom-tailored navy silk jumpsuit that had taken 3 weeks of precise fittings to get right. In my right hand, I held a small, cardstock place card printed with gold ink. Table 14. "Oh, good, you found your place, sweetie," my sister-in-law, Vanessa Vance, said, stepping directly into my path with a champagne flute swaying precariously between her manicured fingers. Her lips were painted a sharp crimson, curved into a tight, theatrical smile. She gestured grandly toward a tiny, wobbly card table tucked into the dark back corner of the room, positioned directly beside the swinging double doors of the noisy service kitchen, where 4 children under the age of 10 were currently smearing chocolate icing across paper placemats. "We had to be exceptionally selective with the main seating chart tonight, Sarah," Vanessa continued, her voice dropping into a loud, performative whisper that carried to the guests nearby. "The head tables are strictly reserved for people with actual corporate titles, executives, board directors, people whose public standing elevates the family's profile. Since you don't actually work a real job and just stay home playing on your laptop in your pajamas, we figured you'd be much more comfortable keeping the little ones entertained." My brother-in-law, Julian Vance, stepped up beside her, letting out a deep laugh into his crystal glass as he adjusted the oversized gold cufflinks on his tuxedo. "Don't take it personally, Sarah," Julian said, offering a patronizing pat on my shoulder. "It's just basic business etiquette. Tonight is the biggest night in the history of Vance Logistics. We have regional bank officers and federal infrastructure contractors in this room. We simply cannot afford to have empty, non-corporate titles occupying high-visibility seats at the primary tables." I looked down at the tiny piece of paper in my hand, then at the small plastic chair designed for a primary school student, and finally at the 2 of them. I didn't flush with anger. I didn't raise my voice. 8 years of managing high-level, classified strategic defense logistics under strict federal non-disclosure agreements have trained me to keep my pulse entirely flat when facing hostile elements. Before I could take a single step toward the back corner of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors at the front entrance were slammed wide open against the brass wall stops. 4 armed Federal Protective Services officers dressed in dark tactical dress uniforms stepped into the foyer, immediately establishing a strict security corridor. The laughter across 30 tables died in an instant. The live string quartet stopped mid-measure. Walking briskly down the central aisle came Deputy Director Richard Vance, Julian's estranged uncle, a man who hadn't stepped foot near a family gathering in over 15 years, wearing a tailored charcoal suit with a silver Senior Executive Service lapel pin. He didn't head toward the head table. He didn't acknowledge Julian's outstretched hand, or Vanessa's frozen smile. He walked straight to the dark, shadowy back corner of the room, stopped directly in front of my tiny plastic chair, stepped back, and offered a deep, formal nod of official military deference. "Director Miller," the deputy director said, his deep, authoritative voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "The Department of Defense has just authorized the emergency release of the classified logistics infrastructure contract. The Pentagon board is on the secure line, and they are waiting for your signature to finalize the $40 million facility acquisition. My name is Sarah Miller. I am 31 years old, and for the past 6 years I have operated as the founder, sole owner, and chief executive officer of Vanguard Strategic Logistics, a private, highly specialized defense infrastructure firm that manages classified supply chain architecture, emergency fuel routing, and critical medical transport networks for federal agencies. If you don't work inside the world of federal procurement and defense intelligence, it is incredibly easy to misunderstand what logistics actually means. Most civilians hear the word logistics and instantly picture commercial semi-trucks on interstate highways, cardboard boxes piled high on wooden pallets in suburban warehouses, or delivery drivers signing electronic clipboards. But strategic defense logistics is a completely different universe. It is about predictive spatial algorithms, secure satellite routing over non-permissible airspace, emergency fuel depot management in hostile environments, and zero-fail medical supply chains during global crises. When our systems work properly, nobody knows we exist. When they fail, military operations grind to a complete halt, and lives are lost. because over 95% of my firm's operational work falls under strict federal classification, high-level non-disclosure agreements, and Title X security protocols, I live in total professional anonymity. I couldn't advertise my company on social media. I couldn't post sleek photos on LinkedIn celebrating corporate expansion. I couldn't explain to neighbors why black SUVs occasionally pulled up to my office, or why I was taking encrypted, triple-authenticated video calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. To the outside world, my business was completely invisible. My firm operated out of a plain, unmarked brick building, under a secure commercial and government entity code, registered directly through classified federal procurement pipelines. I didn't come from money, prestige, or corporate pedigree. I grew up in a quiet, blue-collar manufacturing town in western Pennsylvania. My father was a high school history teacher who spent 35 years teaching local kids about civic duty, integrity, and the weight of personal responsibility. My mother was a head trauma nurse at a county hospital who regularly worked grueling double shifts just to ensure my younger brother and I could go to university without taking on crippling debt. They were quiet, deeply pragmatic people who lived by a simple, unshakable philosophy. I remember a specific rainy Tuesday evening when I was 14 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table, complaining bitterly about a classmate whose wealthy parents had bought her a brand new car and who constantly bragged about her family's status. My mother walked into the kitchen after a 14-hour emergency room shift, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, her hands red and swollen. She pulled out a wooden chair, set down a cup of black tea, and looked at me with a calm, unyielding intensity. "Sarah," my mother said softly, her voice steady and deep. "The people who run around screaming at the top of their lungs about how important they are, those are almost always the people who do the least amount of real work. The people who actually keep the world spinning, the ones who fix the broken pipes, save the dying patients, and keep the lights on, they don't need a marching band. They don't need a parade. They just do the job, and they let the results speak for themselves. Don't ever trade quiet competence for loud vanity." That lesson became the bedrock of my character. When I graduated from university with a degree in industrial systems engineering, I didn't join flashy commercial corporate firms in high-rise towers. I went straight into specialized defense contracting, starting as an entry-level logistics analyst. I spent 4 years absorbing every detail of federal procurement law, emergency transportation networks, and strategic resource allocation. When I was 25, I took a massive leap of faith. I emptied my small savings account, took out a commercial business loan, mortgaged my modest townhouse, and founded Vanguard Strategic Logistics. In the early days, it was just me sitting in a tiny spare room, surviving on 4 hours of sleep, eating instant noodles, and working 8-hour weeks building proprietary supply algorithms. I slowly built the firm brick by brick, winning small federal subcontracts, proving our reliability during emergency deployments, until Vanguard grew into an indispensable defense contractor holding 3 major contingency awards. 4 years ago, I married Mark Vance. Mark was completely different from the rest of his family. He was a quiet, incredibly hardworking civil engineer who designed municipal water and sanitation systems for the state government. He didn't care about luxury brand logos, country club status, or corporate posturing. He loved me for my calm nature, my loyalty, and my sharp intellect. When we got married, Mark knew I ran a private logistics consulting firm, but because of my security clearances, he only understood the high-level summary, that I designed complex supply algorithms for large institutional clients. He respected my privacy, trusted my integrity, and never pushed me to violate my legal non-disclosure obligations. To Mark, I was simply Sarah, his brilliant, quiet wife who worked on her laptop in her home office. However, Mark's extended family, specifically his older brother Julian and Julian's wife Vanessa, were governed by a completely different set of values. The Vance family owned a modest regional trucking and warehousing operation called Vance Logistics, which had been started by Julian's father 20 years earlier. It was a decent, mid-sized business that pulled in a respectable local revenue, but Julian and Vanessa carried themselves as though they were international shipping moguls. They leased expensive luxury sports cars they could barely afford, wore designer clothes covered in loud brand logos, and turned every single family gathering into an insufferable lecture about their corporate expansion, their executive titles, and their high society aspirations. From the moment Mark introduced me to the family, Vanessa made it her personal mission to establish a rigid social hierarchy with herself at the top. I vividly remember our first family Christmas dinner at Julian and Vanessa's house. We were sitting around their formal dining table when Vanessa turned to me, cutting her steak with deliberate, dramatic precision. "So, Sarah," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial curiosity, "Mark tells us you run some kind of small business from home. What exactly is it that you do? Are you selling craft goods online? Or is it freelance administrative work?" "I run a private logistics firm," I replied politely, keeping my tone warm and grounded. "We design supply chain optimization and infrastructure transport models for large-scale operations." Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, so you're a virtual assistant. That's so sweet, Sarah. Honestly, it's wonderful that Mark lets you have your little laptop hobby while he brings home a steady, dependable government paycheck." Julian chimed in right on cue, raising his wine glass with a smug grin. "Hey, look! Every household needs someone to manage the digital grocery list and keep the household budget on an Excel sheet. Real logistics. Managing heavy fleets, maintaining 50,000 square feet of commercial warehouse space, negotiating diesel fuel hedge contracts. That takes massive capital infrastructure. That takes real executive leadership, not just sitting on a sofa in your sweatpants." I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them that my little laptop hobby generated more net profit in a single fiscal quarter than Vance Logistics earned in 3 years. I didn't tell them that while Julian was struggling to coordinate regional delivery routes across 3 counties in Pennsylvania, my firm was actively managing emergency fuel and medical corridors across strategic international sectors. I simply took a sip of water, smiled politely, and let them enjoy their illusion of superiority. Over the next 3 years, their condescension transformed into open arrogance. Every holiday, birthday, and family dinner becomes a stage for Julian and Vanessa to perform. When Mark and I bought a quiet, sturdy brick house near a local park, Vanessa made sure to publicly comment in front of the entire family that it was a cute, humble starter home, before launching into a 20-minute monologue about the sprawling, heavily mortgaged mansion they were building in an exclusive gated subdivision. Whenever the topic of business came up at the dinner table, Julian would wave his hand dismissively whenever I attempted to join the conversation. "Sarah wouldn't understand high-stakes corporate strategy," Julian would say, chuckling condescendingly. "She operates in a vacuum. Real business requires dealing with government inspectors, union drivers, and bank financing. You're just playing in the sandbox, Sarah." What bothered me wasn't their arrogance. It was their fundamental mistake of confusing silence with weakness. They assumed that because I didn't boast, I had nothing to boast about. They assumed that because I didn't wear anything worth it on my sleeve, my hands were empty. 6 months before the country club gala, Vance Logistics ran into severe financial distress. Julian had made a series of reckless, ego-driven business decisions. He had taken on millions of dollars in high-interest commercial loans to lease a brand-new fleet of semi-trucks that he didn't have the cargo volume to fill. Shortly after, Vance Logistics lost 2 of its largest regional shipping contracts due to poor management, delayed deliveries, and severe operational incompetence. Desperate to avoid public bankruptcy and keep his lavish lifestyle afloat, Julian put all his operational chips into a single, high-stakes basket. He submitted a bid for a major federal infrastructure subcontractor certification, a multi-million-dollar government program that could save his dying company if approved. To celebrate their anticipated bid submission and to impress local bank executives, commercial lenders, and regional government officials, Julian and Vanessa organized an opulent annual gala at the prestigious Fairview Country Club. They spent tens of thousands of dollars on crystal table settings, fine wines, and custom invitations, inviting 70 high-profile guests to witness their supposed corporate triumph. I knew the event would be an insufferable display of vanity, but for Mark's sake, as his wife, I agreed to attend. I bought a simple, tailored navy silk jumpsuit, put on a silver necklace my mother had given me, and prepared myself to endure 3 hours of passive-aggressive snubs, sit quietly through Julian's speeches, and return home to my work. I had no idea that night would mark the absolute, catastrophic end of the Vance family's illusion. The grand ballroom of the Fairview Country Club was blindingly bright, illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers suspended from vaulted ceilings. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, imported floral arrangements, and roasted prime rib. 70 guests sat around long, immaculate tables covered in heavy white linen, decorated with gold-embossed menu cards and polished silver. Mark had been delayed at a municipal site emergency 40 miles away, a main water line break that required his immediate engineering oversight. He had called me 40 minutes prior to apologize profusely, promising he would arrive at the gala as soon as the line was stabilized. I arrived alone at 7 o'clock, carrying a simple leather clutch purse that held my personal phone and my encrypted, high-level federal access token. As I walked through the arched glass entrance into the registration foyer, Vanessa was standing near the guest registry wearing a striking, over-the-top red sequined gown. She held a silver clipboard, holding court with two senior commercial loan officers from a major regional bank. When her eyes landed on me, she stopped talking mid-sentence. Her gaze swept down my navy jumpsuit with deliberate, slow contempt. She handed her champagne glass to a nearby waiter and walked over, stepping directly into my path. "Sarah," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine warmth. "You actually made it. And, oh, look at you. So simple. You couldn't find a formal dress for an executive event?" "It's a formal tailored jumpsuit, Vanessa," I replied, keeping my posture straight and my tone perfectly neutral. "Where am I seated?" Vanessa lifted her silver clipboard, scanning the seating diagram with a slow, exaggerated frown. "Well, as you know, Sarah," Vanessa began, raising her voice so the nearby bank officers could hear every word. "Tonight is a monumental corporate evening for Vance Logistics. We have federal procurement officers, senior commercial lenders, and regional infrastructure directors in this room. Seating at the primary tables had to be strictly prioritized for individuals with real corporate standing, people whose executive titles bring weight and prestige to the room." She pointed a long, manicured red nail toward the extreme back corner of the massive ballroom. Tucked far away in the dark shadow of a thick support pillar, directly beside the swinging double doors of the kitchen, was a tiny, wobbly plastic card table, the kind used for children's birthday parties. Surrounding it were 4 short, bright blue plastic chairs. Sitting at the table were 3 young children belonging to a junior sales representative, messy with chocolate cake and crayons. "We placed you at table 14, Vanessa said smoothly, offering a tight, triumphant smile. "With the children. Since you don't actually work a real job and just play on your laptop in your sweatpants at home, we figured you wouldn't fit in with the corporate executives at the main tables anyway. Plus, you can help keep the little ones quiet when Julian delivers his keynote address." I stared at her for 3 long, unblinking seconds. My heart rate didn't elevate by a single beat. "Vanessa," I said, my voice low, clear, and steady. "Mark is Julian's brother. I am his wife. You are seating me at a plastic children's table by the kitchen service doors because you believe I lack a corporate title?" Julian walked up behind her, setting a heavy, arrogant hand on her waist. He adjusted his tuxedo lapels, looking down at me with an amused, superior grin. "Come on, Sarah, don't make a scene," Julian said loudly, gesturing with his hand as several nearby guests turned to watch the interaction. "It's just strategic event management. Tonight is about corporate credibility. We are positioning Vance Logistics for a major federal infrastructure bid. Having an unemployed home-based freelancer sitting next to the regional port director just doesn't project the right image. Take your seat at table 14, enjoy the dinner, and let the real business professionals work the room." A few nearby managers from Vance Logistics let out quiet chuckles, shaking their heads and turning back to their drinks. I looked at Julian, I looked at Vanessa, I looked at the tiny plastic chair sitting in the shadow of the swinging kitchen doors. In that moment, I had choices. I could have pulled out my phone, logged into my corporate portal, and displayed my firm's federal tax returns showing tens of millions in net liquidity. I could have shown them my high-level security credentials. But 8 years in strategic defense operations have taught me an absolute tactical rule: never interrupt an opponent who is actively destroying themselves. "I understand completely," I said softly. Without another word, I walked past them, navigating through the sea of tuxedos, silk dresses, and champagne glasses, heading straight to the far corner of the room. I stepped into the shadow of the pillar, pulled out a small blue plastic chair, sat down, and placed my clutch purse on the wobbly table. For the next 40 minutes, I sat quietly, while 70 guests at the main tables drank champagne and listened to Julian standing on a wooden riser boasting about how Vance Logistics was poised to dominate government transport across the region. I sat at table 14 helping 8-year-old Leo choose a green crayon to color a dinosaur. At 7:45, the heavy leather clutch purse sitting on my lap began to vibrate with a sharp, distinct double-pulse rhythm. I unzipped the bag, pulled out my encrypted Federal Hardware Access token, and looked at the glowing digital readout. Security Protocol Alpha, Pentagon contract execution imminent. 3 seconds later, my personal phone lights up with an incoming call from an unlisted secure government line. I brought the phone to my ear, keeping my voice low and composed. "Miller," I said into the receiver. "Director Miller," came the crisp, sharp voice of Special Assistant Commander Evans from the Defense Logistics Agency. "The Congressional Armed Services Committee has just formally approved the Emergency Infrastructure Transport Bill, 20 minutes ahead of schedule. The $40 million strategic logistics contract for the Eastern Seaboard is officially cleared. We require your digital key and physical signature immediately to lock in the regional facility acquisition." "I am currently in Western Pennsylvania, Commander," I replied calmly, looking out over the crowded ballroom, "attending a private dinner." "We are aware of your location, Director," Evans stated efficiently. "Deputy Director Vance from the Regional Acquisition Division was dispatched to your location 15 minutes ago with the physical execution binders. He should be arriving at your venue right now." I looked up from the tiny plastic table. At that exact second, the heavy, double oak entrance doors at the front of the grand ballroom were slammed open with a resounding crack that echoed through the hall. The sudden, violent impact of the heavy oak doors striking the brass wall stopped, caused the live string quartet to collapse into total silence mid-note. The casual chatter across 70 guests vanished instantly. Glasses stopped clinking. 4 tall, immaculate officers from the Federal Protective Service, dressed in dark tactical service uniforms with gold federal shields pinned to their chests and sidearms at their belts, stepped through the entrance. They moved with absolute tactical precision, immediately establishing a security line across the foyer and clearing the central carpeted aisle. Julian, who was standing near the main wooden stage holding a microphone mid-sentence, froze completely. His face flushed dark red, then drained to an ash-gray pale. He assumed the federal officers were an emergency security detail for a high-ranking state senator he had invited weeks ago. Stepping through the security corridor was Deputy Director Richard Vance. Richard Vance was a legendary figure in military logistics circles. A 60-year-old former Navy logistics captain with 4 decades of service, he now serves as the Senior Executive Service Director for the Defense Logistics Agency's Regional Procurement Command. He was also, though almost no one in the room knew it, Julian's estranged uncle who had severed all contact with Julian's branch of the family years ago due to their toxic, unethical business practices. Julian dropped his wireless microphone onto the wooden lectern with a loud, ringing screech of audio feedback. He quickly smoothed down his tuxedo jacket, forced a broad, desperate smile onto his face, and rushed down the stage steps toward the center aisle. "Uncle Richard," Julian called out, expanding his arms grandly as he hurried forward. "Sir, what an absolute honor! I had no idea the Federal Procurement Office would send a senior director to grace our corporate gala. Please come right up to the head table. We have a prime executive seat reserved right next to the bank directors." Deputy Director Richard Vance didn't even slow his stride. He didn't look at Julian's extended hand. He didn't acknowledge Vanessa, who was rushing over with a fresh glass of champagne. He walked past Julian as if he were an invisible shadow, his sharp, steel-gray eyes sweeping across the massive room. "Where is Director Sarah Miller?" Richard Vance's deep, booming voice echoed off the high ceilings, cutting through the silence like an artillery shell. Julian stopped dead in his tracks, blinking in total, uncomprehending confusion. "Who? Sarah? My brother's wife?" Vanessa ran up beside Julian, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "Director Vance, there has been a massive misunderstanding. Sarah doesn't work here. She is just an unemployed stay-at-home freelancer. She has zero connection to federal contracts. We are Vance Logistics. We are the executives who submitted the federal infrastructure bid." Deputy Director Vance stopped in the middle of the carpeted aisle, turning his head slowly to glare down at Vanessa with icy, absolute disgust. "Submitted a bid?" Richard Vance repeated, his tone laced with harsh authority. "Mrs. Vance, your firm's bid was formally rejected by the evaluation board 3 days ago due to insufficient capital infrastructure, severe operational liabilities, and impending insolvency. You are not receiving a federal contract." A collective audible gasp swept across the room. The commercial bank officers sitting at the head table exchanged sharp, alarmed looks, immediately pulling out their notebooks and whispering frantically. "Then why are you here?" Julian stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead, his voice cracking with panic. "Who is Director Miller?" Deputy Director Vance didn't offer him another word. He turned away, walking past the head tables, past the floral centerpieces, all the way down the long hall to the dark, shadowy back corner of the room. He stopped directly in front of table 14, the tiny plastic children's table sitting right beside the swinging kitchen service doors. I sat there quietly, holding my black encrypted security token in my right hand, while 8-year-old Leo sat beside me clutching his green crayon. Deputy Director Vance brought his heels together and offered a deep, formal nod of professional difference. "Director Miller," Richard Vance declared, his voice ringing across the silent hall, "I apologize for the security intrusion. The Congressional Armed Services Committee executed the authorization 20 minutes early. Vanguard Strategic Logistics has been officially awarded the $40 million Eastern Seaboard Defense Logistics Command contract." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the grand ballroom. Julian's jaw dropped so low it looked dislocated. Vanessa stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, her hands trembling so violently that her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor with a loud crash. "Vanguard Strategic Logistics?" Julian whispered, his face completely drained of blood. That's her company?" Deputy Director Vance turned his head slightly, glaring back at Julian over his shoulder with absolute disdain. "Vanguard Strategic Logistics is the premier private defense infrastructure firm on the Eastern Seaboard, Mr. Vance," Richard stated coldly. "Director Miller owns and operates the entire entity. Her firm manages strategic supply corridors for the United States Department of Defense. Her clearance level outranks every individual in this room." Richard turned back to me, unzipping a heavy leather Federal Courier briefcase and laying 2 thick, gold-embossed execution binders onto the tiny plastic children's table, right beside Leo's coloring book. "We require your physical signature and encrypted token authorization to finalize the acquisition, Director," Richard said respectfully. I pulled my silver pen from my jumpsuit pocket, signed my name across 3 master execution pages, pressed my thumb onto the biometric scanner of the hardware token, and handed the binders back to the Deputy Director. "Contract executed, Director Vance," I said calmly. "Thank you, Director Miller," Richard replied, closing his briefcase. He looked down at the tiny blue plastic chair I was sitting on, then glared at the swinging kitchen doors 2 feet away, his face set into a dark line of rage. "Director Miller?" Richard asked, his voice echoing with thunderous clarity. "Why are you sitting at a plastic children's table beside the service kitchen?" I stood up slowly, smoothing down the front of my navy silk jumpsuit, looking across the room at Julian and Vanessa, who looked like walking corpses. "Because, Deputy Director," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "My family informed me that since I don't work a real job and just play on my laptop at home, I wasn't qualified to sit at the corporate tables." Deputy Director Vance looked at Julian, then at the bank executives sitting at the head table. "Is that so?" Richard said, his voice dripping with lethal coldness. "Well, Mr. Vance, I suggest you explain that logic to the bank officers sitting behind you, because as of 10 minutes ago, Director Miller's company just acquired the regional logistics hub facility your firm was leasing. Effective next month, her company is your new landlord. 6 months have passed since that evening at the Fairview Country Club. The fallout for Julian and Vanessa Vance was swift, absolute, and completely catastrophic to their personal and professional lives. In the world of commercial banking and corporate logistics, news travels at light speed. Within 48 hours of the gala, every regional bank, commercial lender, and transport partner in the tri-state area knew the full story of what had transpired. The bank executives who had attended the dinner, realizing that Vance Logistics was facing complete operational insolvency and had lied about their federal prospects, immediately froze their credit lines and called in their commercial loans. Unable to secure emergency funding or cover their massive fleet lease debts, Vance Logistics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy less than 2 months later. During the court-ordered asset liquidation, my firm, Vanguard Strategic Logistics, purchased Vance Logistics' primary warehousing facility and commercial fleet at a bankruptcy auction for pennies on the dollar, integrating the useful infrastructure directly into our expanding defense network. Julian was forced to liquidate his luxury sports cars, sell his unfinished mansion in the gated subdivision at a massive loss, and take a mid-level shift manager job at a third-party distribution center in rural Ohio. Vanessa's standing in regional social circles vanished overnight. The story of the woman who put the owner of a $40 million defense firm at the kids' table became an infamous local legend, a cautionary tale about the ruinous costs of unchecked arrogance. Mark arrived at the country club 20 minutes after the federal detail had cleared the room. When he learned how his brother and sister-in-law had treated me, he severed all contact with Julian, refusing to provide a single dollar of financial assistance during their personal bankruptcy. Mark continues his work as a dedicated civil engineer, standing proudly by my side as my equal partner. As for Vanguard Strategic Logistics, our expansion was phenomenal. With the execution of the Eastern Seaboard Defense Contract, our firm doubled its operational headcount, opening a state-of-the-art secure operations facility overlooking the river. On the wall of my new executive corner office hangs a single framed item. It isn't a copy of the $40 million federal contract. It isn't a photograph of me shaking hands with Pentagon directors or federal officials. It is the small paper cardstock place card from Table 14. The one that reads, Sarah Miller, Kids Table. I keep it as a permanent daily reminder. True strength never needs to shout. Real capability never demands a spotlight, a grand stage, or a head seat at a vanity table. The most powerful, capable people in any room are often the ones sitting quietly in the back, working without noise, letting their results deliver the final verdict when the time comes. Leave the word silence in the comments right now if you believe that true human worth and capability are proven through quiet hard work and real results, never through loud bragging or stepping on others. Arrogance always demands an audience, but real authority operates in silence until the work is finished. And if this story reminds you to never judge a person's capabilities by their quiet demeanor, subscribe, because tomorrow I am telling you about a corporate accountant who was publicly fired by her corrupt CEO for refusing to sign an illegal tax document, only for the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit to walk into the board meeting 3 hours later. I'll see you there.